Welcome back to Tanstwocents, where we talk real strategy for businesses in the federal market. Today, we're tackling a moment that has everyone's attention: SBA's full scale audit of the 8A program. And every 8A firm has been told to produce 3 years of financials and contract records by early January, with the warning that failure to comply could mean losing program eligibility and facing further investigation actions. This episode is not about politics, it's about fraud, integrity, and how this shift in oversight impacts your current contracts, your future pipeline, and the way you build a resilient business beyond one certification. I'm joined by GovCon leader Eric Sedlacek, and today we're going to look at this from all sides: the AA firms under the microscope, the quote unquote vanilla smalls, and other set asides watching for opportunities, and the government customer who still has missions to execute regardless of audits and headlines. Eric, welcome to our show and say hello to our listeners, who we call the Intellectuals.
Thanks, Ton. Really appreciate you having me on the show. Big fan. I've always enjoyed these episodes. Great to be here on a Monday morning with you.
So tell us a little bit about what got you into GovCon and a little bit about your new company.
Sure. So I actually joined GovCon industry about 16 years ago now. Time flies when you're having fun, I suppose. I started my own firm in 2024, helping small businesses and medium-sized businesses compete with large contractors. So really, focusing on strategy and growth strategies for entry into new markets, to pivoting into new customers, things of that nature. It's been a really fun adventure so far, and I really, have enjoyed working with companies that are looking to try and expand their customer reach while also, strengthening whatever customer base they currently have.
Yeah, exactly. And I love GovCon because you meet people in random ways. And you and I met on a signal channel that we won't mention. But it is kind of interesting how we have so many mutual, um, LinkedIn members and contacts and things like that. So this conversation here today, I'm really looking forward to getting a little bit more insights on this topic. But Eric, when you think back over your career, what was that one moment where you realized that the system only works if we can trust the data and the people behind it?
It was, I think, early on, 15 years ago, I was focused on the Afghanistan market. There were, as we all remember, a lot of contracts, and a lot of those contracts were occurring in non-permissive environments or, incredibly difficult places. And so there was constant need for verification and validation that things were happening as they were supposed to happen, and what was being invoiced to the government was indeed occurring. And there was just a constant, I think, concern amongst the government that things were being reported that weren't necessarily accurate, didn't exactly, reflect reality. There's a very famous article, The Road to Nowhere, on the front page of the Washington Post, that I think of specifically. And, that won't get into specifics around who the contractor was that was named in that article, but simple sort of, genesis here is that there was a road that was supposed to be built. They were invoicing for the road. The road supposedly existed. And then a very curious government employee flew a drone over that stretch of road that ended up not being there. And so it opened an entire sort of, I think, set of eyes that then resulted in lots of scrutiny, lots of auditing, lots of people's data being questioned in terms of what they had submitted, what they had said they'd done. And, just like some of the things we're about to discuss, a lot of good firms were audited and were under intensive scrutiny for good work, because there were a few examples of firms that had sort of taken another approach.
Yeah.
And, data integrity was everything, especially in that kind of an environment where it was so hard for the government to reach out and touch or see what they were paying for. And, it was just an eye-opening experience for me. And also it sort of the genesis of the joke. Whatever you do, make sure that you're okay with it being on the front page of the Washington Post. And I think it's an important tenet to live by in this world.
Yeah, that's every GovCon person's nightmare, right? Is what can I do to make sure that I stay off the front cover of the Washington Post? So um, hopefully we'll try to unpack some of this, but it also kind of reminds me of the movie War Dogs too, right? It's that story is amazing. The fact that it was an amazing movie. My son, my 15-year-old, even loves that movie.
It's a great movie, and it's one where if you're in our world, there are so many things that we've
Oh,
probably all seen that that happen. My favorite scene is when they're talking about what they bid that large contract for, and
yeah.
the government's like, "We're not supposed to tell you this, but you were $250 million less than the next bid."
Yeah.
Classic lesson there too.
That is the worst, leaving money on the table. You're like, ah, damn it. I knew I came in too low. So, anyways, but I know we're gonna joke and we're gonna poke fun. And I think this is, even though I put out the full disclaimer, this is not meant to be a political conversation. There's always gonna be someone who's gonna take it the wrong way and get their nose bent. But hey, this is just my 2 cents. So y'all can get your own podcast and talk about whatever you want. But I'm here to just kind of keep it a little real and unfiltered. But let's just jump into our first segment here today, which is the SBA's letter, right? So the letter requires all the 8As to turn over 3 years of financials, bank records, payrolls, subcontracts. It's the whole kit and caboodle. Again, if you've got a good contracts management process, if you've got all of this, if you've passed audits before, this should not be, a problem. And many of these are part of the standard, 8A review process. But what's actually new here? The scope, the timing, and the fact that it's coming from the OGC as part of a fraud focus audit, right? So tell us nuance wise and maybe tea leaves wise, how's this different than your standard audit?
Absolutely, thanks. And I appreciate you framing our conversation in this way because I think it's important. This it's not about politics. It's not about advocating one way or another about the future of the 8A program. I spend my days advising contractors across growth, capture, and transition moments, and I can tell you that I think this one is different. And things are already happening. I think there's a shift in behavior across the system that we're seeing, and if we're going to really cut through the noise, like you said, some of it might be tea leaves, but it's amazing how much of it is now out in the open. That if you aggregate this data into one place and start to really look at it across the board, there's a lot of noise, and the noise is becoming a heavy metal concert, I guess you could say. At first glance, you're right. None of these documents are exotic. 8As are, already submitting a lot of these documents. But I think, what's new really isn't the existence of the data and the need for the government to have this data. I think it's more the scope of the ask, the owner of the process, which you alluded to,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of the timing here, which I think changes a lot of perspective. In June, when Secretary Loeffler said she was going to conduct this audit, it was originally going to be targeting sole source awards that were of like significant dollar size.
Yeah.
She was going to go back 15 years, and she really just, I think, was focused on that sort of sole source competition. And the nature of this request obviously is quite different because the data call came not from like the business development or certification part of SBA. It came from, as you said, the Office of the General Counsel, and it went to every single participant. So it's not limited by like the scope of the awards or the method of the sort of contracts being awarded either. It's really just they wanted a comprehensive data pull, and I think that this the data pool itself tells you that they're not looking, I think, so much as did you file the right paperwork, but they're actually more interested in how does your business operate. They're asking for a lot of operational documents because, I think people would probably tell you, at least lawyers for sure, that contract execution is where a lot of the fraud will live. Who's really doing the work? Where does the money flow? How control is exercised? How subcontracting is structured? And, whether those sort of operational, approaches and patterns align with the eligibility rules. So I think that, that is really what it comes down to is they're looking at this from a how does your business operate lens.
Yeah.
And that's different, you know?
And the timing is really interesting too, right? Over the holiday season, at the end of the calendar year, um, that really kind of heightens this emotional temperature. Everyone's been kind of in this mad frenzy, on edge, walking eggshells, kind of, like all year. So I think the timing is also very telling.
I do too. I think the timing and the way that this request was framed by Secretary Loeffler, it's not subtle, right? Like it was the data request was accompanied by a direct statement from her that went out on Twitter or X, and then also on the website itself, where she says out in the open, evidence suggests that the 8A program has been increasingly used for pass through vehicle for abuse, and SBA intends to review every contract, every contracting officer, and every contractor in coordination with law enforcement and other agencies. So I think that framing really matters. When the leadership sort of signals that accountability is going beyond, firms and to contracting behavior and agency decisions, I think the scope is quite broad, and it becomes more of an enforcement environment. And I would say that, just she is obviously, by making those kinds of public statements, operating from a place where she believes that fraud exists,
Yeah.
and that it is significant. And this is a significant action. So I think you're right too on the timing. I mean, a 30-day turn over the holidays is particularly difficult for any business. Most people would like to be taking time off with their families and enjoying, this sort of quieter period. And in reality, I think that this is probably, resulted in tiger teams being formed at companies. I mean, people are definitely going to be working a lot like longer hours over these holidays to respond to this data request. And, that involves obviously a host of internal actors. You're going to need your senior executive team from both, finance, contracts, like business development, because they're often involved in partnership creation and those sort of operational like partnership agreements. So I think it's fascinating because she also sort of has a little bit of a threat embedded there where it's like, if you don't submit your paperwork
Yeah.
on time, you might be out. And, that's a pretty
That's a big shot
strong,
across the bow.
yeah, it's a pretty strong statement. And the third thing too, it happened after this letter from Secretary Loeffler, but a few days later, Senator Joni Ernst, she came out like with, I would say, two shots across the bow, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that
Yeah.
further on, but that is also, I think, as I said, when you start to aggregate all these things that are happening, there's a coordinated sort of effort here that is cutting across both the Hill and the agencies themselves and SBA.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's, again, like we said, this is more than just a paper audit. There's credibility, there's trust at stake, and these are all other elements of government contracting that we're going to unpack here in our other segments. But I want to talk about our next segment here about current 8A contracts. And what's really kind of at risk. That's the big elephant in the room, right? This isn't just about paperwork and eligibility. with the SBA and other agencies, and also, with Congress looking back at some of these high dollar, limited competition 8A contracts, there's a real possibility of disruption in some current work, some current contracts. And there's a lot of large 8A sole source contracts out there. So, like in the worst case scenarios, part of the program could freeze. Some programs might go away. Programs might be, on pause, or contracts could be terminated. So some of these, contracts are mission critical. So, Eric, from where you sit, how real is this risk that some of the current 8A contracts might actually get swept away with this, and cause some mission impact on the government customer, not just business, but pain. Like it's not just on the company side, right? It's also on the government side. So there's pain on both sides.
No, I think you're right, and the sort of reality is that one of the things that Senator Ernst has also done is she's put forward legislation to pause all 8A sole source awards until the audit is complete by SBA, which, I mean, it will certainly go for a few months beyond when the data request is due. So we're looking at a minimum, I would say, ongoing recompetes or acquisition processes that have already started that we're intending to be, some sort of 8A set aside or sole source acquisition approach. I think those are definitely going to be, I would say, disrupted. I would also say that, depending on what is found by the sort of review of the various data, receipts that are going to come in, you're right. Like some contracts that are in place that are currently, delivering for, mission critical services, they could be found to have been, done in a way which was, I suppose, like not acceptable to the current, SBA team, or it could also, be a reflection of, what we saw with another firm that recently was, quite publicly outed. All of their contracts could be paused if there is, fraud that's identified. They could potentially, really impact various companies. If one contract is found to be, problematic, does that have a ripple effect across the portfolio? And perhaps there's a part of a particular agency that is found to have, I guess, questionable or problematic approaches to acquisition that then raises scrutiny across, awards themselves. So it's hard to speculate. I think that, mission disruption is never a good thing. Everyone agrees there.
Yeah.
And the government doesn't want that. But at the same time, like if we're just being, honest with each other, that is a real possibility. And I think that it would be unwise for anyone to not consider it as such.
Yeah. So, I don't like to use the word hope very often because hope's really not a strategy, but I do hope that the program doesn't blow up. As much as I am a huge critic of the 8A program, there are some benefits to it. I've worked for 8As. We have 8A clients here at Entellect, but you're already seeing calls from the Hill to like pause and heavily scrutinize, these awards as things kind of like play out. But if you're running like an 8A firm, or if you're advising one on a critical program today, let's say whether it's cyber, logistics, or emergency management, mission critical type of support, like what are some practical moves that you might make right now to kind of protect that contract and that mission, and your business if for some reason the contract does get hit paused?
Yeah, you're right. And we always say hope isn't a strategy. And, I would say the priority has to be continuity and maintaining credibility with your client. So If I was advising a CEO at an 8A right now, I would probably focus on four main pillars, because you have to be focused in a moment like this. And one is sort of, you need to be ensuring that your PMs are documenting performance, staffing, and work share cleanly and clearly. You want to make sure that you protect the mission. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, those functional units are so critical here. Finance, subcontracting, everything needs to be, I think, clean so that you can reconcile your story, easily defensible, because inconsistency is going to create risk, right? You want to make sure that you are doing things, I don't want to say boring, but like consistently the right way,
Yeah.
very carefully documenting your approaches. Communicate with the customer. I mean, they are aware of this. They are also probably under a different sort of scrutiny than the delivery. But I would also say that it's important to just say, look, not coming in from a defensive posture, but reassuring them that we're stable, we're compliant, we're still execution focused, we're not going anywhere, and we've been doing things the right way. So, let us know how we can help
Uh-huh.
you during this time. And I would also say scenario plan, right? You have to like be looking at what does this mean for the business 6 months from now, not 6 weeks. And that's just, if there's a pause, like we said, on new awards, okay, what does this mean for a potential recompete for this program? If option years now are maybe in jeopardy and won't be exercised, how can you help to sort of work with your customer to ensure that that doesn't happen? And if an audit expands beyond what this initial data call looked like, who owns the response internally? And really, just I think your program reviews probably need to go from a quarterly basis to like a monthly basis to ensure that you are, you know, dotting I's, crossing T's, and printing cleanly.
Yeah, no, those are, I think the one part that never gets highlighted or discussed enough is what the government side is experiencing too, right? I can only imagine what the PMs, like you said, and the cores and 1102s are looking at this point. That everything that they do, every decision that they make, um, is being scrutinized. And like we said before, I think the administration is looking for bad buying habits, bad buying behaviors. But there are a lot of really good 1102s out there, and like that are doing the right thing, that are using the right tools and using the right approach. Are you, have you gotten feedback or a sense from the government side, what they're thinking, how they're feeling?
Yeah, before I answer that, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the letters that went out. So,
The 22, yeah.
yeah, the background here is on the 8th of December. Senator Ernst sent a letter to each agency head, and each letter was structured the same way, and I think it's important because it's the structure is the signal.
Yeah.
They're coordinated, and they're clearly, like I said, going to DHS, DOD, Commerce, Energy, Interior,
All the
DOJ,
departments. Yep.
all same framing, same legal citations, same demands, and same deadlines, right? And so each letter does three things. The first is it establishes, a record in her mind that the 8A program risks aren't new. She flags, multiple
Mhm.
GAO reports, OIG, DOJ. It forces agencies to put their position in writing. Will you pause sole source awards or not? And will you audit or not? And third, it sort of focuses on a downstream accountability for senior acquisition officials and contracting officers. So, they're talking about, in each of these letters, she gives examples of
Yep.
particular contracts that she feels are, in question. Um, and so I would say that it's a coordinated signal to every buying agency, and it sort of ties back to what Secretary Loeffler said. She was indicating in her public statement, I think that there's massive fraud. Well, Senator Ernst in each letter has basically said, I've identified contracts that I feel like are questionable and potentially inappropriate in each agency. So these are
Mhm.
obviously tied. So wherever you sort of land politically, it's the change to sort of risk behavior inside agencies right now is certainly, I think, going through a reflection point because the scrutiny has increased. There isn't a formal pause yet. Her legislation hasn't been passed, but she's effectively asking the agency heads to make that commitment to her. And so when you go back to your original question about like, what does this mean for sort of some of the government folks? Obviously, I think there's some anxiety here. Like, I think that ongoing 8A programs, obviously, the priority, as you said, is continuity. No one wants the gap in those mission critical services. But for acquisition planning, I can assure you that there's hesitation, right? Strategies are going to be reexamined. Approvals are going to go higher in the chain, right?
Yeah.
There's probably going to be some agencies that commit immediately to this pause, maybe some that don't as quickly commit to it, but some of them will. And so I don't think that we're looking at them walking away from the program wholesale because a competitive 8A solicitation is of course different than a sole source solicitation, and she's specifically asking for a pause on sole source. So what I think is, they're looking for defensible decisions on their side, right? They're looking to make sure that they're protecting themselves, their agency, and the mission. And so clean files, like we said, clear work share, contractors who are visibly in control of their performance. That's the kind of sort of, I think, that is the kind of defensible, I think, behaviors that the contracting officers are really hoping to see because it's going to make their lives a lot easier when they move to make the awards. Because at the end of the day, they're still going to buy, right?
Yeah.
They won't take any unnecessary risk when they do it. And I think that they're going through this just like the contractors are. I think that there's probably uncertainty and fear and hesitation on both sides. And so that's, again, back to your question of what would I say to CEOs. I mean, you need to be talking to your customers and you need to be understanding their position, right? We, as business development people, we try to go through like the empathy, approach of empathizing with the customer, talking to them about what they're dealing with, what their problems are, how can we make their lives easier and deliver. This is just another part of that, right? And it's a very, I think, as you said, emotionally charged topic because there feels like there might be finger pointing going on here. But you have to be talking because the only way you can get through it is if you help your customer help themselves.
Yeah, and personally for me, this is a no-brainer. I see this as a non-event just because I feel everybody should compete. You should focus on the mission. You should focus on your core capabilities and whether or not you can perform, not because of any set aside or sole sourcing, advantage that you might have. So again, I'm all for it. This seems like a very, common sense type of approach to it. And it's ruffling a lot of feathers, but you can definitely see that there's a concerted effort across the board. And, like to your point earlier, I think everybody's got a little bit more information and they're holding their cards pretty close to their chest. Uh, and that could possibly be why everything is so fast tracked. But again, we are into December of a new administration. This is not news, people. This is how this administration operates. And so this is going to be your new normal for at least the next 3 more years. So I would say it's December, buckle up, because 2026 could be better. But let's kind of take what we've learned this year and be a little bit more prepared for it next year because I think, if anything for this administration, again, not to get on a political standpoint, but very transparent. You're going to see it kind of coming, and you may not realize, what came across the bow. You may not, agree with it, but it is what it is. So let's move to our next segment, which is the future for acquisition, right? I want to be kind of honest. I'm a little bit biased here. I've never really subscribed to sole sourcing. I am a true hypocrite. I've been on the receiving, the positive side, and have totally benefited from, source contracts. So yes, I hear what I'm saying. But I absolutely see the value in the program. The program gives disadvantaged businesses an opportunity to access opportunities that a smaller business sometimes wouldn't be able to access from a disadvantaged perspective, right? Um, but by design, the 8A program has an expiration date for a reason. And at some point, like I always prescribe, you gotta learn how to compete in a competitive environment. I believe in competition. I've lost, I've won, I've suffered, like a protest, like I've been through all of it. But so Eric, from your perspective, how do you look at this tension? There's, where's the line between sole sourcing and set asides as a need to like leg up versus being dependent upon them in a way that just really isn't sustainable, like, and it shouldn't be.
No, I agree, and I'm like you, and I think the administration is like you. They believe that competition is important, and competition, particularly in a price sensitive environment. And I would describe the administration as being price sensitive across
Yeah.
the board. It doesn't matter what they're buying. Um, I would say that competition is the key to a thriving and healthy market. And so I understand what the program intends to do. And I guess I would frame the tension in this way. You know, the sole source approach is a tool. It's not a business model, right? Like it shouldn't be a business model. It's, if used correctly, the 8A sole source and set asides are a learning accelerator for disadvantaged businesses to help them grow, to help them be able to compete in an open market. And they kind of have this protected window where they can build past performance, they can understand how agencies buy, they can professionalize their delivery and invest internally in capabilities that will serve them in a more competitive and open environment. Um, where it breaks down, I think, is sort of when access gets confused with competitiveness, right?
Mhm.
If your growth strategy depends entirely on a protected pathway and you're not preparing for graduation, I mean, that's probably not the strategy that I would advocate for. I think that this is one of those things where the spirit of the program matters, but at the same time, like there is, as you said, supposed to be a window here of only a certain period of time where you have basically this opportunity to compete in a different way to build your capacity to compete in an open way later.
Yeah.
And that, I think there's some true benefit to having that, um, and to having that structure in place to incentivize new firms to enter the market. Um, but as I said, it can't, it can't be a situation where your entire business model is built around a protected pathway to, revenue and contracts.
Yeah, so that's the whole point, right? Like, while you're under this program, you need to be building that infrastructure. You need to be building, and flexing and learning how to use that competitive muscle, whether it's, you know, learning how to competitively price, learning how to do proper capture. What does a good proposal discipline and process look like? So you do this before you fall off that cliff, before you kind of graduate. And I've seen, and you probably have too, I've seen some companies that really mature well, and have really kind of taken that, opportunity to grow through the 8A program. Most 8A companies do graduate, but we all know there's a lot that die on the vine because they never quite understand and learn what's the customer's mission, what makes us unique, what are our core capabilities, what are our discriminators, things like that, that kind of um, get overlooked sometimes when things gets too easy, right? Like it's like give me a hand up instead of a hand out.
Yeah, and I think, I heard someone say once that, firms who treat this as this sort of sole source or set aside pathway as a bridge are going to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
But firms who treat it as the destination or as a competitive moat, they inevitably get exposed, right? And so I think that it comes down to, I would say, a very deliberate strategy on the part of the business, like owners or leaders, where they know they have a period of time in which they have to make, incremental progress and build capacity. And so they would probably be wise to have sort of milestone markers, like we always do in proposals as well. Here's where we are, and in year 2, here's where we need to be in year 4, and by year 6, we're effectively operating without the need for this sort of protected pathway, because we have probably, with 6 years, you've gone through at least a few different program cycles, and you've sort of been able to take what you've learned and build your business in a way that's responsive to the government customers, or you've decided it's not for you, right?
Uh-huh.
There are people who also do that. They go through the process of getting certified. They start to see what it means to be a government contractor, and we all know it's hard. And some of them are like, look, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and okay, when it's over, it's over. But I think that having that window of opportunity for disadvantaged firms is an important one. But I am also, as you said, a firm believer in competition.
Yeah.
And even if it's an 8A competitive process, right? Set aside for 8As, make it competitive. I would prefer to see that than sole source awards. And I think, based on all the communications we're seeing from the government, there's a lot more interest in the sole source awards, I would say, than the 8A set asides.
But, let's take this moment here to also talk about there's other smalls too, though. There's veteran-owned smalls. There's the HUBZone program, which, bless its heart, tries so hard to get the respect and the acknowledgement of government. And then there's the women-owned small program too. So they all have their own set-aside goals and authorities. But this is kind of an interesting moment here about if 8A contracts get paused or recompeted or shifted, there's still a lot of work that still needs to get done. And I believe that this is a huge opportunity for some of the other small business set-asides to kind of come in and show, hey, we're here too, right?
I agree. I think this moment is creating both a real separation within the existing 8A firms, who is on top of their stuff and who isn't. And it's also a real opportunity, I think, for those firms you just mentioned, right? And those that have already competed and won outside of these types of protected lanes, where they've got this. I would say that the 8A certification status is a weapon, right? If you use it appropriately, right? So they've been building this sort of this capacity and this capture muscle that they needed to compete outside of that pathway, pricing discipline, proposal rigor, capture strategy, all that stuff. So I think the second order effect here is that with the number of contracts that were probably expected to be recompeted or staying within like an 8A acquisition strategy, and that sort of is definitely in flux, or at least in question, there are going to be a lot more opportunities that come out for companies, those smalls in particular, to, I think, pursue. And so those that have done things the right way are going to be positioned, I think, to be very competitive and also, like, hopefully be aggressive, because there is just, I think your funnel just got 3x wider, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yes, you've got to discern whether or not these opportunities are for you, but like there's definitely more of them. And so when we talk about more competition, and I think that this is definitely a situation where agencies are still going to need outcomes. they need lower risk paths to get there, and firms that can, basically answer the call. And if they help them hit other small business goals, will be, I think, having a very good 2026.
Yeah, exactly. So, speaking of which, in our next segment, I want to talk about winning as a legit A-Day, right? Mission first, always. I live by it, I believe in it. And a lot of our other colleagues, including you, me, and a lot of people that we know, believe in the same way. Um, that principle has always steered me the right way. You can't lose by focusing on the customer's mission. And a lot of times proposals are lost because you don't understand the customer, right? We talk a lot about understanding the customer or the environment. If you understand the customer, then you know how to price. Whether or not they're price sensitive, if they're risk averse. If you don't deeply understand that and what they're trying to accomplish, I think a lot of companies really need to kind of reevaluate whether or not you bid. That's part of the bid, no bid, decision. Even if you're technically capable of doing a work, and you and I know this, it's never, the bid decision is never, can I not do the work? Because you can always find a team member to kind of augment where you're deficient. But it's a lot of times whether or not you should do the work. And when you look at the bids that you lose, how often is the real problem what the company didn't truly understand the mission and the environment versus just missing the requirement?
It's a great, we could probably do a whole hour just on this. Before I get into it, I was actually just thinking I would be remiss if I didn't add to your previous question. The other factor I think that's going on, and this is again part of the administration's push with, I think we're going through a generational sort of transformation on GovCon. They have obviously pushed hard for a centralization strategy with acquisitions,
Mhm.
right? They want to move things under GSA. They want things centralized so it's easier to buy. And I believe that with what's going on, and as we discussed earlier, the potential that several, lots of contracts will be shifting an acquisition strategy outside of what was, I would say, minimally burdensome from an administrative perspective for a contracting officer. If you're an agent in an agency and you're a CO or a KO, it's a lot easier to run that acquisition process through one of these pathways we've been talking about than having something like being full and open, or just a regular SAM.gov small business set aside, right? You're going to get a bunch of bids. I think that we'll see a lot of things that were intended to be 8A shifted over to sort of these best in class vehicles they've been pushing for on the centralization
Mhm.
side. So Oasis Plus, you've got access to all the smalls who cover all of those different statuses that we talked about. And so I would actually think that to I guess alleviate what would have been a more intensive administrative burden to place on an agency, they're going to do what they intended from the beginning of the year, which is let's move more of these out of agencies and into GSA, into centralized buying under best in class vehicles where we know we can get pricing that we like. We know we have access to firms that already have their business in order. And so I think that, Oasis Plus is about to come out again, right? The next round with the new
Yeah.
functional areas and the on ramping. If you're a small business and it's coming out in January, if you're a small business and you are not on it, I would suggest that you strongly, consider pursuing it, because I do think that funnel we talked about that's getting a lot wider is also going to flow through those vehicles, in particular Oasis Plus. So I'll put that there. But you know, going back to your original question, I would say with the go no go, um, like you said, often in the services business, we can say we can do the work.
Yeah.
You know, whoever the people are, everybody's going to say. And I had a CEO who was a particularly challenging go no go brief, and he used to say everybody is going to say that they can recruit these people, and everyone's going to say that they're going to pay them and take care of them well, and that is not going to win us the bid. So you need to show me, convince me that you have customer intimacy that allows you to respond in a way that is not just, oh, we can fulfill the requirements, but it's demonstrating a true intimacy and knowledge of that customer's mission, of that customer's pain points, and really what what does the future look like for that customer? Because who they are today is not who they are tomorrow. And if you're talking to them as though you already know what they're trying to do as they move forward versus what they're trying to do today, that makes more of an impression. Yeah, I was on the receiving end years ago of a, I say funny now, but it was a hard debrief at the time, oral debrief. And the customer said, "Look, we loved your proposal. We thought it was strong. We loved your price. But some of the evaluators had never heard of you. And so we scored you well and we liked the price, but we just, a couple of them just couldn't sign off on it because we just didn't know you." And they're like, "And we'll never admit that we told you that, but that spend some more time with us, make sure that everybody knows who you are, because we're very interested in working with you in the future." And that certainly made the lesson, you know, quite clear and come home, that customer intimacy and making sure that the individuals on the evaluation panel know who you are, know what you represent, because there's a familiarity, I think, that's required for the trust to give you critical mission work.
Yeah, so that's a fine line, right? Because I know that I have friends and colleagues who are like, we win work all the time as an unknown entity. And I think it's a balance between BD getting out there and making sure that the customer knows who you are before you actually submit a bid. But sometimes you need to do what I call throwaway bids, where you know the bid is a throwaway. For that reason, right? Like they don't know who we are, but they now know you, right? And now they are aware, hey, they put a rock star, like proposal together. We love their pricing. So now having that conversation and seeing what you can do, that will then help you in your next one, right? Now it's actually opening a conversation. And so there is a lot of criticism sometimes in industry against going for these bluebirds, going after, some of these throwaway type of, bids, because you're never going to win, but sometimes you win by not winning, right? Like that seems. Do you get what I'm putting down here?
100%. And, I would say, um, I once had a very similar conversation with an executive, and he said, "That's a very expensive marketing uh, material. That's a very expensive marketing document." And I was like, "You're right, it is." But I said, but I would say that every proposal is a sales and marketing document. I
Yes.
was like, and they're all expensive. But, sometimes you, as you said, are bidding on one opportunity to basically create positioning for the other one, the one you really want.
Yep.
And, I've seen it also under IDIQs where sometimes you just need to see how they score. You want to see, okay,
You got to submit a task order to see how it
yeah,
exactly, right?
if you want to know how they buy, you've got to submit, because you want feedback and you want to see, okay, was it price? Even though they said it wasn't price, was it
Yeah.
really just price? And I think that, while those types of efforts sometimes give executives heartburn because of the costs, you know, it truly is one of those situations where you are going to, if you do it correctly, come away with enough intelligence and understanding of that buyer to make sure that the next one is not,
Yeah.
that sort of sunk cost. And you never know too, because I have seen, just like you have, where you think that proposal is a throwaway. You're like, I just want to get in front of them. I want them to talk to me. I want them to have to debrief me. And then it turns out you win.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow,
You're like, oh
okay.
shit. Like,
Yeah.
what?
It's a
No,
lovely.
but my argument to the executives because that's their job, right? That's their job to be like, oh my God, it costs so much, or I can't believe, like we spent all this effort in it. Um, but it's not an act in futility because now, because you get the debrief, and I'm saying, and not every contract, warrants or allows for a debrief. So, make sure you understand what far apart you're, submitting under. But now you know what works. And so a lot of times I'll come in and the customer's like, oh my God, we got all this reuse. We've got all this, like proposal stuff. It's already 80% written. And you look at and you're like, it's crap, right? Or like, have you won with this, with this content before? And so you don't know what really resonates or what really wins until you kind of put it out there and you test it with the customer. It's like sending out like, an expensive trial balloon. But some companies can afford to do that. Others can't. Sometimes I swear if it's a no brainer, if it's a low level effort, I'm just going to toss it in there just to kind of see, what they come back with. But, the point of our original discussion here was that what I've seen is it's really, can we do the work? But I think sometimes we lose in like three different areas, like we said, the landscape, the customer, and then like the competitive pricing. But if you were to advise companies, right, in these, three areas, what does good look like for each one of them? What does good look like for understanding the landscape, the customer, and the knowing the price and the pricing competitively?
It's a great question. And I would say that, understanding the landscape is by far and away of the three the easiest. And to me, it's also if you don't have your capture prep appropriately aligned to a full landscape understanding and sort of comprehensive brief, it's a little unforgivable to me because I think that from a desk, you can quickly, with tools that almost everyone has available in the growth space, you can quickly ascertain, all right, what has been the historical life cycle of this contract? How many iterations are we on now? Tell me about the customer organization that it lives in. Tell me about the agency itself, and some of what we've been talking about earlier with like administrative, focal points, right? Like politics and policy often drives like demand signals down into the agencies themselves. Things are priorities for an administration, and those then have I would say some secondary ripple effects on the design of new iterations of a contract that's been around for quite some time. So there's an incredible amount of research that can be done, and especially now with all the AI learning model, like LLMs, you can take a lot of really dense data, and as long as you know how to use those tools properly, you can get it back in a way that just it helps you sort of frame the battlefield, right? And you need to have that understanding before you go meet the customer, because if you don't have that, if you haven't immersed yourself in that contract's sort of history, the history of the customer, and sort of the, I guess, intended outcomes of the contract itself, it's really hard for you to convince me that you should be talking to the customer about that contract.
Yeah.
Um, and so once you get through those sort of initial, and I mean, that's just, again, it's a desk brief.
Well,
And
you're right. You bring up a really good point in that I wish I had the AI tools and the research tools 20 years ago when we started in this business, because I'm like, oh my God, I could have like, conquered and taken over the world by now. Because seriously, like there's no reason why you can't understand not only the landscape, but the government customer, because there's so much data out there. You put in your buying customers, their website, the people from LinkedIn, like I've had conversations with people that I've researched so well. I know exactly what their pain points are, and it's solely based on what they put out there,
Yes,
what they talk about. It's like, oh my God, it's like you're speaking to me. And I'm like, yeah, because I cyber stalked you. And now I kind of know and have reframed, like, that's the whole framing the conversation to not only like, here's your assumption, but let's validate by having these discussions. There's no reason why you should not be able to understand the customer and have intimacy with the customer in this day and age.
I
I,
agree. And especially we know that quite a bit of the materials you need to help prepare yourself for that conversation are public. You got to go find them, and then you take them and you need to sort of like distill it down so that you have a firm grip on, you're not going to have much time with that customer the first meeting, right? They
Mhm.
don't, time is precious. So you need to know what you are trying to communicate and what you're trying to,
Yeah.
get from that meeting. And customer intimacy doesn't come in one meeting, it comes in a couple meetings. And I think that part of that too is also, they talk a lot about subject matter experts and thought leaders with proposals. If you're a true growth person, you need to be able to position yourself as a thought leader with the client. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think, sometimes it's given a little bit more emphasis than it needs. But part of that too is then where are they? And this is hard with this administration because they weren't letting them go travel for a while. But
Right.
what industry events are they attending? Where are they seeking out their sort of knowledge? Right, because in all likelihood, they are a thought leader around this, whatever the topic is on their side. So, finding ways to engage with them besides like a standard, office call,
Yeah.
is important. And I think that, it's only in those sort of intellectual, honest conversations that you can really start to create some intimacy, because they'll tell you, oh, yeah, I know we wrote that, but like, it's not working.
So I think that's where, you know, I think when people talk about like AI models and using AI, like I tell my 15-year-old, I used to tell my 15-year-old use Google for good, and now I tell him use AI for good, right? And so if you do that, that really frees you up to be that strategic person, that analytical thinking, and that's where like the real problem solving comes into play. Digesting all this data, giving you great summaries or framing things in a certain way, that's super easy. But it's learning how to spin and use that information to your competitive advantage, which really kind of makes the third leg in this question so important and so like difficult. Is I think pricing is probably the hardest part in this model, because pricing is one of those witchy kind of things. And I hate to end this, like I hate to end this podcast on pricing, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of contracts are lost on pricing. It's lost on, you don't know how to price because you never quite know the customer. Where are they coming in? Are they going to be price sensitive? Is it best value under the costume of LPTA? Or you know what I mean? Like
Oh, yeah.
it's so hard.
And pricing, I used to joke, it's like black magic. It's just,
It is the
you,
black arts. Yes.
it's funny because, you know, there is, you want to talk about healthy tension, sit in a price, to win discussion with the ops people on one side of the table, the capture people on one side of the table, and then the executives on the end, because there's a never, I think, an initial alignment. It takes a while to get there. And, I also would say that oftentimes, the management challenge necessary, like, you have to take them if you're trying to unseat an incumbent, right? You know that you're going to need to come in lower, and you're going to take some kind of management challenge on that. And that's only going to come from your executives, allowing you to do it. But it's also going to come from like a place where you as a capture person has convinced an ops person to take that risk with you. And the other thing too, I would say is the wire brush, right? Like if you're defending a contract, I I have been on, a critical losing recompete before. And oftentimes, like, there's this really, this really strong tension around incumbent staff. We can't cut their salaries. We can't lose them. Like, the
Yeah.
customer loves them. And then, you end up not winning because your competitor came in 12% or 15% lower than you. And sure enough, when they said to those individuals, well, we have your job. It's for a little bit less money, but we still have your job. Would you like it? Or would you like to not have your job anymore? And they always say they would like to keep their job. So it's a challenge, but I would say that those discussions, those really healthy conversations around alignment between the ops and the capture teams, they have to occur early. They have to happen fast, and they need to just be going the entire time, because that's the only way that you can get to a price that will win, but you can execute and not lose money, especially in an environment where I think you see a lot more firm fixed price. I mean, I'm seeing a lot more FFP work.
Yeah, FFP is my world. So, that and cost plus. So, anyways, this has been a fantastic conversation, but we do need to kind of wrap it up with a few takeaways from our conversation here today. And I think, the biggest thing is, um, I would say treat this 8A audit as like a forcing function to, I think, what's going to be better and a more resilient business in a business environment. I think the SBA is pushing to root out fraud. This is fraud and abuse. We all know that it happens. We all know that it's there. There is corruption. No, it's like, the inside the beltway's dirty little secret. And it's kind of, coming to roost. But I think the firms that are standing after this are going to be stronger and better and have a better trust and credibility with a government customer. But there is silver lining. I'm always looking for that silver lining. This is totally a wonderful opportunity and a momentum to kind of not only, tighten your internal governance and documentation, but businesses, you need to do better. And there are some businesses out there that are doing wonderful things. There's some wonderful automated systems out there for you to kind of help manage a lot of this documentation. So definitely invest and look into those. And then it's an opportunity, I think, for the vanilla smalls. It's a great way to kind of diversify outside of, like the 8A program and sole sourcing. I remember when the 8A program was in its infancy. I remember when the service disableds were there too. And so I think it's kind of their time to kind of come out of the shadows of the 8A program to show that there are some really great vanilla smalls, veteran-owned 8As and HUBZone businesses out there. And that, I think with the early retirement and the RIFs and different things like that, there's definitely like a contracting overhaul and a shift in new thinking, a shift in new ways of looking at, government risk and ways of contracting that I think from a modernization and an overhaul, do I dare say revolutionary overhaul perspective, that it's a positive thing, I think, overall. So as we head out of 2025 here, which is why I wanted to get to you like before the end of the year, is what's your takeaway as we head into 2026 here?
I think there's a couple, but really, when we all come back to like the same thing, you and I, like, competition. Competition is important. Competition matters. Competition means a healthier market. And I think it's coming back. I think competition is coming back hard. It's going to be probably a little unforgiving for some people. Ultimately, like, if your business model, as we said, depends on sort of protected lanes, staying protected, that's probably not going to serve you in the long term. And I think that, as you said, revolutionary overhaul. I mean, I've said this to all of my clients. We're going through a generational transformation here, and the way of doing business before is not the way that they are going to do business moving forward. And I would say that, this audit, it didn't create the problem. It might expose a problem, but there have been, documented issues here. And so I think that ultimately the center of gravity has shifted from, are you eligible for these set asides, to, can we defend this decision? Competition is king. So the market's about to change, and it's about to professionalize fast. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to separate themselves, because if you can separate yourself and, thrive in this market, that's a great thing. And if you haven't built yourself to compete, you need to make a change quickly, because change is coming. And so, ultimately, in any difficult, I would say, or constrained market, the winners are those that I think embrace the change and don't try to sort of remain shackled to a legacy, approach.
Competition is coming back hard, and I personally love the forecast for 2026. And if the volume of work and the fast pace of awards, MDA Shield got awarded so quickly.
Yep.
The Oasis Plus, like we said before, the phase in with the 5 new domains is coming out, and it's like, it's a rolling admission for that. That I think there's where companies were left out in the cold for a while. I think you're going to start seeing a forward, faster moving, oh my God, I can't believe the government moves so quickly, type of approach. So I'm encouraged by it, despite all the naysayers and the doomsdayers and, and whatnot. So, and this actually now concludes our episode on 8A Under a Microscope episode. Please subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for future episodes every Wednesday. And I'm due to record another Tanstwocents quick wisdom soon. So we'll see what comes up next month. And over the holiday season, we're going to take some time to enjoy time with friends and family. And I hope that you do too. So Eric, thanks for joining us here today. I'm like, how was it? You're always welcome to come back, but I'm hoping this exercise and this podcast has been enjoyable for you, because I know that we've tackled a lot of interesting and controversial things, and I know that our intellectuals are going to love this episode.
It really has been a great experience. My first podcast, so thanks for going easy on me. But truly, I appreciate you. Very engaging host, and I look forward to seeing the work as you put out some more new topics. A lot of things happening, so there's a need for these sort of open discussions, I think, with all the changes that are happening on sort of what I think is like a daily basis.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again.
Oh, I'm so glad you were here. And again, this administration is the gift that just keeps on giving. So there's never
of topics.
There's never a lack of topics. So thanks again, intellectuals, for listening here today. Remember, you have to think big to win big. Be an intellectual. And until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of possibilities.